Some of the loudest voices telling men how to be men are quietly shaping them in ways they don't fully understand. They call it red pill. They call it truth. They call it awakening. But I want you to slow down and look at the outcome, not just the language. Because a lot of men who consume that content aren't becoming stronger. They're becoming more suspicious, more angry, more isolated, more reactive. And that raises a serious question. If something claims to empower you, but leaves you mentally heavier, emotionally colder, and relationally disconnected, is it really empowerment? I studied that space. I didn't ignore it. I didn't dismiss it emotionally. I examined it, and I rejected it. Not because it has no truth inside of it, but because it mixes fragments of truth with distortions that slowly shape your mindset in the wrong direction. In this video, I'm going to give you 10 precise reasons why the Wise O.G. rejects the Manosphere, and why you should critically examine it too. Not emotionally, intellectually. Let's establish something clearly before we go further. This is not an attack on men. It's not an attack on masculinity. And it's not a rejection of self-improvement. In fact, I believe men should be stronger than ever in this time, disciplined, focused, mentally sharp, emotionally stable, purpose-driven. But strength without clarity becomes confusion with intensity. And a lot of what circulates in Manosphere content is intensity without clarity. It feels powerful in the moment, but it often produces instability over time. And I want you to think long-term, not emotionally reactive, but structurally aware of what builds you and what breaks you down. Now let's go point by point. Reason 1. It teaches you to reduce women to categories instead of people. One of the most consistent patterns in Manosphere content is reduction. Women are described in tiers, labels, types, classes, metrics, high value, low value, alpha, beta, hypergamous, conditional categories. And when you spend enough time hearing people talk like that, something subtle happens. You stop seeing individuals. You start seeing classifications. But here's the problem. Human relationships don't operate like a ranking system. A real relationship requires perception beyond categories. It requires nuance, context, emotional intelligence, awareness of individuality. When you reduce people to objects or data points, you don't just change how you view them, you change how you relate to them. And over time, that creates emotional distance in every direction. Because what you practice externally eventually becomes your internal operating system. And if your internal system cannot recognize people as full human beings, then connection becomes impossible. Not difficult, impossible. Reason 2. It replaces accountability with external blame. A second major pattern is narrative displacement. When something goes wrong in a man's life, relationships, finances, opportunities, it gets explained through external causes. Women are blamed. Society is blamed. Modern culture is blamed. Systems are blamed. And let me be very direct. External factors are real, but over-reliance on external blame removes internal responsibility. And when responsibility is removed, so is power. Because the moment everything is someone else's fault, you stop believing you can change anything. That is the hidden danger. Not anger, stagnation. A man who cannot say, "What part of this is mine to fix?" will never grow beyond his current level. Accountability is not comfortable, but it is the foundation of transformation. Reason 3. It promotes a fake version of masculinity. A lot of Manosphere content encourages men to perform masculinity rather than develop it. Louder voice, harder posture, more dominance, more intimidation, more competition. But real masculinity is not performance. It is internal structure. It is the ability to remain steady when nothing is validating you. It is discipline when no one is watching. It is restraint when you could overreact. It is control when chaos is present. Performance masculinity collapses under pressure because it depends on perception. Real masculinity strengthens under pressure because it depends on principle. Reason 4. It uses anger as a retention mechanism. This is one of the most overlooked dynamics. A lot of content is designed to keep you emotionally activated, not informed, activated, because activation keeps you engaged. You watch because you are irritated. You stay because you want resolution. You return because the irritation gets reinforced. But here is the problem. A mind that is constantly activated cannot become clear, and clarity is required for good decision-making. So if a philosophy requires your emotional agitation to sustain itself, it is not building your intelligence. It is managing your attention. And that is a different thing entirely. Reason 5. It teaches manipulation instead of character development. A significant portion of Manosphere advice focuses on tactics, what to say, how to act, how to win, how to influence outcomes. But tactics without character are unstable. You can manipulate a moment, but you cannot manipulate a lifetime. Eventually, reality exposes the difference between who you are and what you perform. And when that gap becomes visible, trust disappears. Because people do not build with strategy alone. They build with integrity, consistency, and predictability. Character is what sustains relationships when strategy stops working. Reason 6. It erodes your capacity for healthy connection. When you are constantly taught to be suspicious, guarded, and defensive, your relational instincts shift. You stop interpreting people. You start evaluating them. You stop listening. You start scanning. But human beings are not problems to be solved. They are experiences to be understood. And when every interaction becomes a test instead of a connection, isolation becomes your default state. Not because people are untrustworthy, but because you have been trained not to trust the process of connection itself. Reason 7. It promotes a shallow definition of success. Many narratives in this space reduce success to a narrow set of metrics: money, access, attention, sexual validation, social dominance. But real success is multidimensional. A man can have financial resources and still lack peace. He can have attention and still lack direction. He can have status and still lack stability. And here is the deeper truth. If your success requires you to be internally unstable to maintain it, then it is not success. It is strain with external rewards attached. Sustainable success includes mental clarity, emotional regulation, physical discipline, and relational stability. Without those, everything else becomes fragile. Reason 8. It discourages emotional intelligence under the name of strength. One of the most damaging ideas is that emotional awareness is weakness. That expression is softness. That introspection is instability. But emotional intelligence is not the absence of strength. It is the regulation of it. If you cannot identify what you feel, you will eventually be controlled by it. If you cannot process your internal state, it will leak into your external behavior. Every unexamined emotion eventually becomes action, so emotional intelligence is not optional for a strong man. Reason 9. It reinforces a permanent victim narrative. Even when the tone is aggressive, many underlying messages still place men in a reactive position. The world is against you. Women control everything. The system is rigged. Nothing changes. Now again, there are real structural challenges in society, but the danger is when awareness becomes identity, because a man who fully identifies as a victim of his environment loses momentum, not because the environment becomes easier, but because his agency becomes smaller. And over time, that produces resignation disguised as insight. Reason 10. It creates followers instead of independent thinkers. The final and most important point is structural. Much of this content is not designed to produce independent thought. It is designed to produce consistent consumption. You watch, you react, you debate, you return. But rarely are you directed inward. Rarely are you asked to think beyond the framework being presented. A healthy system should produce men who outgrow it, not men who depend on it. If a philosophy cannot produce independence from itself, it is not education, it is dependency. Now let me bring balance to this. Rejecting the Manosphere does not mean rejecting self-improvement. It does not mean rejecting discipline, ambition, or masculine strength. It means rejecting distorted frameworks that confuse anger for clarity and dominance for mastery. There is a higher standard of masculinity available. Discipline without ego, strength without cruelty, confidence without insecurity, awareness without confusion, leadership without control. You do not need anger to become powerful. You need clarity, and clarity gives you direction without distortion. Anything that teaches you to hate will eventually weaken you, because hate is heavy, and what is heavy slows movement. But anything that teaches you to master yourself will eventually free you, because mastery creates direction, not confusion, not reaction, direction. If this message challenged you, good. That means you are still thinking. Now ask yourself one question. Are you building your mind deliberately, or are you being shaped by what you consume? Think for yourself. Build yourself. Lead yourself. That is the Wise O.G standard.